Picture yourself alone in a vast forest at midnight. Complete silence surrounds you. Shadows swallow every shape. Then, without warning, a deer emerges from the darkness. But this is no ordinary creature. Between its antlers burns a glowing cross, radiating supernatural light. The animal fixes its gaze directly on you. It doesn't flee. It simply stares, as if it knows something about your soul that you've been hiding even from yourself. What would you do in that moment? Would you run in terror? Fall to your knees in prayer? Or would you stand frozen, unable to move, caught between this world and something beyond? This isn't science fiction. This isn't fantasy. This is the legendary vision of Saint Hubert, a medieval story that has captivated artists for centuries. Yet, one painter dared to depict this sacred encounter in the darkest, most psychologically unsettling way ever imagined. His name was Franz von Stuck, and in 1890, he created a painting so haunting that it feels less like religious art and more like a nightmare you can't shake after waking. The strange truth is, if Stuck hadn't included Saint Hubert's name in the title, you would never guess this eerie, shadowy scene had anything to do with Christianity. It looks more like something from the depths of the unconscious mind, a vision that belongs to dreams, fears, and the mysterious places where the rational world ends and something else begins. So who was Hubert, and why does his story inspire such powerful imagery? According to medieval legend, Hubert was a nobleman living in 7th century Europe, but he wasn't particularly noble in character. In fact, he was obsessed with hunting, not for survival or even sport, but as an all-consuming passion that dominated his entire existence. He would disappear into the forest for days at a time, tracking deer through the wilderness, living for nothing but the thrill of the chase.
One year, on Good Friday, one of the most sacred days in the Christian calendar, Hubert made a decision that would change his life forever. While everyone else attended Mass and observed holy traditions, he grabbed his weapons and headed into the woods to hunt. It was an act of defiance, whether conscious or not, against everything his society held sacred. Deep in the forest, far from any other human presence, Hubert encountered a magnificent stag. But as he prepared to take his shot, he noticed something impossible. Between the deer's antlers shone a luminous cross, glowing with otherworldly radiance. According to the legends, the deer spoke to him directly. "Hubert, if you don't turn to the Lord and live a holy life, you will descend into hell." Imagine experiencing that for a moment. You're alone in the wilderness, miles from civilization, and suddenly you receive a message that shakes the very foundation of your existence. Today we might call it a hallucination, a psychological break, or perhaps a mystical experience. But for medieval Christians, this was divine intervention, an epiphany that could not be ignored. That single vision transformed Hubert completely. He abandoned hunting forever, renounced his noble titles and wealth, and devoted himself to religious life. Eventually, he became a priest, and after his death, the Church canonized him as a saint. Today, Saint Hubert is known as the patron saint of hunters, a beautiful irony, considering he gave up hunting entirely after his supernatural encounter.
The deer with the glowing cross became one of medieval Christianity's most recognizable symbols. It represented divine calling, spiritual redemption, and the sudden intrusion of the sacred into ordinary life. But in the hands of symbolist artists like Franz von Stuck, this image transforms into something far more complex. Something that speaks not just to religious conversion, but to the psychological moment when reality cracks open and reveals something we cannot understand, but will never forget. Stuck's painting doesn't feel like traditional religious art. It feels like standing at the threshold of something vast and terrifying. Looking at it creates an unsettling sensation, as if the painter captured the precise instant when a soul is torn in two. the moment before faith and the moment after, separated by a single heartbeat. To truly appreciate how radical Stuck's interpretation was, we need to compare it with other famous depictions of the same legend. Take Peter Paul Rubens' version, for example. In Rubens' painting, everything feels narrative and theatrical. We see a detailed landscape bathed in daylight, animals scattered throughout the background, and Saint Hubert kneeling reverently before the deer. The cross between the antlers is small, almost symbolic, barely visible unless you're looking for it. The scene is beautiful, dramatic, and clearly tells a story from beginning to end. Franz von Stuck stripped away all of that. He removed every decorative element, every narrative comfort. The background in his painting is so profoundly dark that, depending on the lighting conditions when you view it, you can barely tell there's a forest at all. Secondary details vanish completely. The cross is not small or symbolic, it's massive, dominating the composition, glowing as if it were the only source of light and meaning in the entire universe.
But here's what makes Stuck's painting truly brilliant. He places us in the position of the hunter. We don't observe Saint Hubert from a safe distance, watching from behind or from the side. There is no Saint Hubert visible in the frame at all. Instead, we become him. We are the ones staring directly at this supernatural apparition. The question I posed at the beginning of this video, what would you do, isn't rhetorical. That's the entire purpose of this painting, to make us confront this impossible vision and genuinely ask ourselves how we would react if faced with something beyond human comprehension. This approach reveals everything about Franz von Stuck as an artist. He wasn't interested in simply depicting reality as it appears on the surface. His art was symbolic, psychological, intensely personal. He was fascinated by visions, fears, desires, and the hidden dimensions of human consciousness that most people never acknowledge. When Stuck painted the Vision of Saint Hubert in 1890, he was deeply immersed in German symbolism, an artistic movement that rejected conventional realism in favor of exploring the invisible, the subconscious, and the mystical. Many European artists during this period, not only in Germany but also in France and Belgium, had grown tired of art that simply showed life as it was. They wanted to push beyond surface appearances and represent what couldn't be seen with ordinary vision: the psychological, the spiritual, the archetypal. Artists like Francisco Goya had explored the grotesque and irrational from a social and political perspective, revealing the darkness lurking beneath civilization's facade.
But Stuck approached these themes through symbolism, using visual metaphors and psychological intensity to create images that bypass rational thought and speak directly to something deeper within us. That's exactly what we experience in this painting. Stuck didn't paint Saint Hubert's story as a religious scene meant to inspire piety or illustrate church doctrine. He painted it as a profoundly personal experience, an intimate, terrifying moment of confrontation between the human and the divine, between the known and the unknowable. To achieve this effect, Stuck employed every tool that symbolist art had to offer. He used darkness not as mere absence of light, but as a presence in itself, something that presses in from all sides, threatening to swallow everything. He used silence as a visual quality, creating a painting that somehow feels utterly still and quiet despite containing nothing but dramatic confrontation. And above all, he created the overwhelming sensation that what you're witnessing doesn't quite belong to this world. It exists in that liminal space between reality and dream, between sanity and something else entirely. The original painting resides in Villa Stuck in Munich, Germany. This isn't just another museum, it's actually the house that Franz von Stuck himself designed, decorated, and inhabited. He transformed his home into a total work of art, a Gesamtkunstwerk, where every room, every detail contributed to an overall aesthetic vision. Today, many of his most important works are preserved there, making it a pilgrimage site for anyone interested in symbolist art or the darker currents of late 19th century European culture. Unfortunately, the vision of Saint Hubert is not currently on public display. It remains in the museum's collection, carefully preserved but not hanging on the walls for visitors to see. This makes the painting even more mysterious, even more elusive, fitting, perhaps, for a work about an experience that exists at the very edge of what can be known or understood.
But while the original may be hidden away, the power of what Stuck created continues to resonate. This painting asks us fundamental questions about consciousness, about faith, about the moments in life when everything we thought we understood suddenly dissolves, leaving us face to face with something that defies explanation. What would you do if confronted by such a vision? Would you interpret it as divine intervention, as Hubert did? Would you dismiss it as psychological phenomenon? Or would you simply stand there in the darkness, transfixed by something that your mind cannot categorize, but your soul somehow recognizes? Franz von Stuck painted this moment not to provide answers, but to make us feel the weight of the question. And more than a century later, his vision of Saint Hubert still has the power to stop us in our tracks, forcing us to confront mysteries we'd rather leave unexamined.